Hi, this is Paul, and today I have sort of a special thing. There might be a couple more of these. John Van Donk has been working on his, I'm dyslexic, I always get the name wrong. But John, what's the name of your little outfit here?
The Estuary Leadership Support Network.
The Estuary Leadership Support Network. And part of what we've been doing is training leaders to lead estuaries around the world. Now, there's always little links down below most of my videos, and there's a new link down there now which has to do with a directory for the Estuary Support Network. And sort of what we're doing is that these estuaries and the list are being led by people who have gone through this program. So, but part of what I asked John if we could do would be to host some, let's say, model estuary meetings, and that's what these will be. Now, these folks have been doing this for at least a year now online, and the idea is that in the future, we won't just do these things online. We've got COVID and people are separated and all that. The idea is that a lot of these things will happen in person and not be recorded. But given the fact that they've been doing these online with Zoom, I thought it might be helpful to just have some of these conversations. And I don't know if the conversation will interest the viewer or not, but that has never stopped me posting things before. So why not start now? So I'm basically going to turn this over to John because John's been leading these meetings. And so we'll just get a chance to see how John does it and see what kinds of conversation it produces. So thank you all for letting me into your estuary meeting today.
Thank you, Paul. And that is the key word that you just said there. We don't really know what's going to happen because we never have any pre-planned topics. We never know quite what subjects rise to the top, and we don't know what we're going to end up discussing in the end. But we can certainly walk through our initial protocol of how to get things on the table. And generally, when there are new people, such as you are today, Paul, we generally like to start off by introducing ourselves to one another. And so, David, why don't you introduce yourself, say where you're from, and then also say something about how you actually got here. What was the trajectory by which you ended up in this space with us today?
So my name is Dave. I live in Germany. I live in Mannheim. It's a fairly large city here in the southwest of Germany, right on the Rhine. I work in church planning, church resourcing here for the small denomination called the Mennonite Church. And we work also in social work, have done after school programs, and now we're launching a new program, or a new, in German we call it Familiencafé. So it's like a family cafe. It's kind of going to be in a poor part of town, and it's going to be a way for people to build community, for people in the community to have like a community center, a space where they can, especially for families and young children. We have a playground and all that. We get to take over an old kindergarten. So we're involved in lots of different things here as a family and in ministry, in church work. How did I get into the estuary? What is it called? The support host.
Yeah, right.
We need to come up with some kind of acronym, like it just rolls off the tongue, right? I think, like many, my journey or specific fork in the road is when I started listening to Jordan Peterson. And the reason I started listening to Jordan Peterson and why I stayed with that and why it was so engaging has a longer history. But I come out of the Mennonite Church in the North American context, where I studied peace work and peace and justice work as my background, did peace work for many years, and at some point decided then to start working more clearly in the church, and have seen many trends in the church over the years. But I think one of those that I'm concerned about is that sense of identity and where we are as a relationship of the church related to its own culture. And so I ended up actually studying anthropology and missiology, and that's really my passion is culture and people and how the church fits all into that, because that's always part of bigger conversations about meaning and what we how we relate to people anywhere around the world. And so somebody that's grown up as a third cultural kid, it's something that I'm always part of. And Peterson opened that door where I could start having conversations on a very different level and realizing how there's so much more to explore, particularly in the secular and post-Christian world, which is what I relate to here in the German context. And that was one part. And the other part was my good friend, Matthias, who's part of this group as well. We just happened to run into each other and in Mannheim because he also lives here. And he had also been listening to Jordan Peterson. And we were not really that close at all before. We knew each other in passing. And because of that, we started meeting regularly. We just somehow got on the subject of this and kind of had our own little mini estuary for a long time, until then this opportunity came by to take part in larger conversations on this level. So that's a little bit about my background.
Thank you. And then next is Nate, the Lord himself.
John's calling me the Lord because my musician name is Lord Sycamore. So little inside joke there. Great to be with you guys. Yeah, I'm from PA, or I live in PA, and I got to Jordan Peterson, I guess, because I grew up with in a pretty fundamentalist background and went to a Christian college that sort of had a creation science division for the science department. And I had gone to public school in high school. So the origin story of evolution and the origin story of biblical creationism didn't really fit with each other. And then when I encountered Peterson's biblical lectures in particular, he just seemed to assume that they could, and that was very intriguing. And so I've just been following that train ever since. I guess very curious about those places where the stories are colliding with each other, and yeah, grateful for the work that Paul's doing on his channel of just sort of holding that space open for people to talk to each other. And it's been great to be in that estuary and learn how to practice that too.
Great. Thank you. I see that Matthias has joined us in the meantime. So Matthias, we are just introducing ourselves to the group and pretending that we don't already all know each other. So tell us who you are, where you're at, what time it is, and how on earth did you end up here?
Yeah, hi, I'm Matthias from Germany, near Mannheim, and I figured out that you should read your emails because I didn't know that Paul was here, and I could change things that I'm here now as well. And how did I get here? Well, basically in 2017 I saw the biblical series of Jordan Peterson, and then soon after that Paul's first videos, and then I got to the Discord server, and afterwards at some point the estuary concept developed, and then during that time I got part of this group, and we practiced our meetings every other week, and and eventually I started to open a German language chat in the Discord server, and there we also have a regular German-speaking estuary, and it's going pretty good so far.
Wonderful. Thank you. So Quentin, you want to be next?
Yeah, sure. Quentin, I'm in Central Ohio. Very similar to everyone else on how I got here. I grew up in a rural, small, tiny Baptist church, went off to a Christian college, went through a whole, bit of a deconstruction kind of phase of my life, and I found my way to Paul Vanderklay's channel, and I just noticed myself really struggling to formulate thoughts and actually express them in a, conversational way with other people, and actually have dialogue about things, at work, home, family, church. And yeah, like when the Estuary idea cropped up, I was really interested. So got involved here, and it's been good. Yeah, that's how I got here.
Thank you, Quentin. Tanya, good morning.
Good morning. I'm Tanya, and I'm from Auckland, and I'm really hoping to get a group up and running in New Zealand. I also had more of a fundamentalist Christian background, but was deconstructing. I was widowed 10 years ago, and then remarried, and then divorced. And Jordan Peterson was really helpful for me, but also for my older sons. So that's connected there. And also I've been interested in exploring contemplative spiritual practices. So I got onto John Vervaeke's channel, and then found Paul's channel, and appreciated the openness to evaluate different perspectives. That's been so helpful for me, kind of returning to a church with a little gap where I was wandering in the wilderness, it felt like, but still haven't worked everything out, of course, but happy to stay in that uncertain place, and really interested in journeying with other people in their spirituality.
Thank you, Tanya. And then we have a new guy here, Paul. You want to say something about yourself?
Yeah, my name is Paul. I live in Sacramento. I have a little YouTube channel. I've had conversations with some of these folks before, and they're really good. You can find them on my channel, and maybe we'll have conversations with more. I usually every week try to do conversations with at least some randos, and some of them get published, some of them don't. So I know it's a big competition to grab a rando slot, but I'm just super happy to be here, and I'll try not to talk too much, because I get lots of chance to talk on my channel, but I'm very interested to hear what all of you have to say, and what interests all of you. For me, one of the really cool things about this is, as a pastor, it's very difficult to really know what's going on in the minds of a lot of people in your church. And I like this process because it helps me know what you all are thinking about and what you truly think. And if you don't really know what people think, it's really hard to engage with them productively. So thanks for letting me be a part of this.
Thanks, Paul. So as is our custom, this is where we go around and put some stuff on the table for us to have a conversation about. And the way we do it is I have each one of you share briefly what you have been thinking about, what has occupied your mind, what you've been obsessing about, what you've been pondering in your heart in one of the following 4 areas. And actually you can mention one or several, or if you're really OCD, you can mention all of them. But we are focusing our attention on these 4 areas. So what has gotten your attention intellectually? What lectures have you heard? What books have you read? What articles? What speeches? What did you catch on Paul's channel or somewhere else that captured your imagination and made you think deep thoughts? That's one. Secondly, we live in the world. So what has been happening to you contextually that got your attention? Were there fires, earthquakes, floods, elections, major drama in your town, some headline in the newspaper that got your attention? So intellectually and contextually. Thirdly, we're ordinary people. And so what has occupied your mind personally? Did you have a new baby? Was there a divorce? Did you move to a different town? Did you get a new job? Did you get fired? What's going on in your personal life that you feel comfortable sharing in this forum? And then finally, because of how we came together in this group, which is an estuary type group. What have you been thinking about estuarily, and perhaps especially in your intentions and your efforts and your desires to start an estuary group on the ground? What's happening with that? Is it going anywhere? Are you happy with how it's going? Are you struggling? Are you frustrated? Do you have tips for one another? What have you been thinking about estuarily? I made up that word. It is not really a word in any dictionary, but we use it to our advantage here. So David, why don't you start off again? In any one of those 4 areas, what have you been thinking about that you would like to put on the table today?
I had a sneaking suspicion you'd start with me. I feel like that happens to me every time. And for every reason, I always feel caught off guard every time. All right. Well, today I took a walk even about an hour ago because I wanted to collect my thoughts. I hadn't been here for about a good 3 or 4 times, and there's been a lot of life that's happened. We were in vacation in Turkey, and we spent time with my parents. We were on a sailboat with 3 kids. And so there's a lot of adventures to share, actually lots of deep thoughts that came out of that. But I think where my thoughts, especially in the walk, centered is and again, I had no idea Paul was going to be here today, but I listened to his 3-hour plus video on marriage equality, and it's been circling in my mind. And I had an experience just 2 days ago. I work with different groups here, and that issue was not even on the table, but there was something similar in that conversation where I was like, again, going back to what I think Paul was trying to outline in that video, which, you take the complicated and very maybe sometimes contentious, but it's a very prevalent issue in our society when it comes to how we're defining sexuality today and marriage and what that has to play in it. And the point that I took from that was really this idea of what is an archetype, what is an ideal, what is something that, another way to say it perhaps is even what is something that we've put on the top of the value hierarchy when it comes to how we see relationships playing out, or at least what we strive towards. And it just struck me that approach, or that way of talking about it, also applies to how to God. That in a sense there is an ideal of goodness, or of what we've, at least in the Christian culture, Christendom had, when it was able to define the hierarchy of values, put that at the top, and we're in that space now where that's just not automatically at the top anymore. And that was just something that really struck me after listening to Paul's thing, and how so many of these conversations, like when I relate to other Christians that are dealing with how to talk about that in culture, and also how culture talks about to religious people about that I come from a Anabaptist tradition, which, you could say one characteristic is the kind of egalitarian way we want to deal with hierarchy, with at least in the structures of the church. But I think up until maybe a generation ago, the hierarchy of where you would put God or it would have been fairly clear. I mean, but now that's a very different discussion within the church even, right? Like how you even put that ideal, because it has all these other things attached to it. And so it becomes a very complicated discussion, even in the church, not just outside of the church. And I think what that whole 3-hour process of that video just showed me again of just like, yeah, there's a deconstruction of an ideal going on, and we're finding it hard now to know how to find conversation, mutuality about what we can even agree upon, what's on the top of that value of hierarchy, right? Which just would have been a given 100 years ago. If you were for it or against it, it would have been at the top, right? So anyway, I've been thinking about that a lot because it just comes up more and more in the conversations I have internally, even in the church, because, for example, in the Mennonite church, we want everything egalitarian, but like, yeah, anyway, so that's something I've been dealing with. Yeah.
Thank you, David. Nate, what do you want to put on the table today? What have you been thinking about since the last time we worked together?
Contextually, we had an enormous windstorm here, which knocked down a whole bunch of trees, almost creamed our house, but like went past it and took out our power and internet for a couple of days, which was a very humbling experience, just realizing how dependent I am on power sources outside of myself and how small humans really are. All of that was a gift, though, not only spiritually, but for like the intellectual side of things. You guys all know I've been working on this musical called Hard Heart Phone for the past year and a half. And it's been like wrestling an octopus working on it. There's so many different themes and ideas. But this experience actually helped me to pin down that it's a story about power, with the dramatic question being something like, how do we use power, or how do we respond to other people misusing power? And so it's just got me thinking a lot about the theme of power, like where do we get it from? How do we use it? Jesus lays down his power in serving other people, freeing them. What does that look like for us to do it? And then, of course, what does it look like in the story that I'm writing? So I'd be interested in talking about power in whatever form that connects with what you guys are saying.
Thanks, Nate. Thank you. Quentin, what have you been thinking about since the last time we were together?
Yeah, I guess a couple things. Trying to get our little estuary going. We got 2 guys and here in Central Ohio, and we got like a place, and I think we're going to make it more regularly on a month by month basis. So that's some good news to share. I've been thinking, so I attend a non-denominational Bible church, and we're doing I'm not participating in it, but I have some friends that are going through it, counseling, biblical counseling training course right now. And I've had some real interesting conversations with, some elders, my pastor, and then friends that are going through the course on like, where's the line between psychology and then biblical counseling? Like, what's the difference? And it's funny because like, it's really easy just to fall strongly on one side or the other and completely ignore what the other side is saying. And that's a very fine, difficult, hard line to pin down. And I don't even know if I'm comparing and contrasting it correctly. So I've just been thinking a lot about that. I also, one of the guys in our estuary, both of them actually are Orthodox Christians. So, or they've been going to an Orthodox church. So I went with one of them to a liturgy, my first one the other day. That was very, very interesting. So I've been mulling over like all of that. It was just it was enjoyable, and I had a good time. And yeah, so guess if anyone's interested in what that's like, we could talk about that.
Perfect.
Yeah, that's about it.
Oh, didn't mean to interrupt you, but thank you.
Yeah.
So Matthias, what have you been thinking about since the last time we were together?
Yeah, well, contextually or here in my personal life, yesterday I attended a parents' evening at the elementary school of my younger daughter, and yeah, when 95% of the time the teacher talks about COVID rules and how they can keep the COVID rules in school, that's quite exhausting. Yeah, but so I mean, of course, everybody knows this, and every family knows this. COVID is still pretty hard topic. At the same time, our daughters are after school are connecting to their friends, and so that's good. They have their friends, they have their social relationships, but at school it's still a hard topic. And I think, I mean, of course, there are these rules from the officials, but I think the school is already allowed to do stuff like singing or sports, and so the rules got softer there. But they are hesitant to do what they are allowed still, because they are afraid of quarantine classes and so on. And I think they should just do everything they can with the kids, because I mean, it's just too long for them in the long run. And yeah, but but I mean, there were worse times, so it's kind of okay. But also, I think, yeah, sometimes it's just still a lot. Yeah, and what else can I tell? Well, some of you know that we had an in-person meetup of our German estuary, and that was quite a thing. That was almost 2 weeks ago. And so we normally we meet online every other week, but yeah, 2 weeks ago, the first time we met in person, and we met for a whole day, and we in Neustadt in Germany, which is in South Germany, we met in the morning, 10 people, 10 Bridges of Meaning Discord members, and yeah, a lot of people from Germany. Job was there from the Netherlands, and Rasputin from Switzerland, and that was really a great experience to meet all these people in person. And yeah, that's something that's, I mean, yeah, I'm still thinking about it, and it was a really good experience. We in the morning we had a guided tour through an old church in the city, and we climbed a mountain near the city and had lunch on top of it. And yeah, it was just a great day to connect with all these people, and that's something I'm thinking about these days. Yeah.
Thank you, Matthias. Good stuff. Tanya.
Hello, we're in our highest level lockdown in Auckland. New Zealand's pursuing an elimination strategy. So all small businesses that aren't deemed essential services are shut, and schools are shut, and my teenagers are struggling. We've been stuck in it for about 4 or 5 weeks or something. So we're really hoping just to go down a level so I can buy takeaway pizza for them. That's what I really, and my 16-year-old had his birthday in lockdown. That was a bit, I tried to make pizza, it wasn't as good, So I've been really thinking about the marriage equality, your video, Paul, but I've been thinking about connecting it with counseling and therapy. Like there's a dialectical behavioral therapy which holds, change, but also unconditional acceptance. So I'm wondering, there's a lot of people who've been really hurt and harmed by the Christian church, and I don't know if we've done acceptance that well, but I think the care piece is really important, but I still have an idea of that archetype. I think that's very helpful, which is sacred to me, of one woman, one man for life, even though I've fallen short of myself as a divorced person. So just thinking about, how Jordan Peterson, for example, or a therapist engages with someone in a way that's unconditional acceptance for them, but also holds a standard. And how, I want my cake and eat it too. I want the archetypes as aspirational, something to aim for, maybe, holding that tension between already but not yet. But at the same time, feeling accepted in community, where even when you fall very short of standards. And I know people will want to say, we need to get rid of the standards because it's so judgmental, but there must be a way, just the same as your relationship with a therapist, where you feel unconditionally accepted, and then the person themselves says, well, actually, I would like to change this thing in my life. So I've been thinking about that.
Super. Thank you, Tanya. Well, believe it or not, I have thought about stuff since the last time we met as well. And one of the biggest things that is churning around in my head is related to estuary. So estuarily, I have been thinking about the fact that my church here in Chino formally adopted or sponsored the Inland Empire Estuary as a ministry of the local church, with staff endorsement and elder approval. And you might think that I should be just delighted and super elated and feel very affirmed and all of the above. And yet I still struggle with it, in the sense that it is a challenge, I think, for any Christian person to make room for and to be open to people with completely different value systems and world and life views and perspectives on anything. And so the role of the facilitator of the local estuary will have to be somewhat more open and accepting, and the relatively conservative church that I'm a part of still feels very compelled, and rightly so. I mean, in their own mission statement and their own vision for their own reason for existence, is to draw some lines and say we need to have some lines here, and we need to have some lines here, and this is what we stand for, and this is what we don't stand for. And so yeah, that is a tension that I experience personally, and so I mean, if anybody has any feedback about that, I would be interested in engaging about that topic. So, Paul, have you thought about anything since we last were together?
Nah, I don't think about much.
Okay.
I think about all the things I put out on my videos, and there are always 4 or 5 different other things in my head. You know, they've got way more ideas in my head than can come out my mouth or my fingertips. I've been doing more writing lately on CRC Voices, as John Van Dock knows. It's a little ancient listserv that we both participate in. I've been thinking a lot about wrestling and Mark Driscoll. So American wrestling is an interesting story, and it's extremely religious. And I'm just trying to think about how the palette upon which Americans, maybe not the palette, maybe the stage upon which Americans play religion has so broadened since before the internet, but that broadening has been happening, you know, from all these different steps of technology to characters to writing to paper to, you know, all and all. So just and that makes it harder to ask questions. Okay, what is this? What is it for? What are we doing? What is good? What is bad? So I just always think about this stuff. So that's what I'm thinking about.
Super, and we're glad you are. So so this is the point where I always remind people that it's kind of important that when people share what they want to put on the table, it's important that we listen very carefully, because now you get the opportunity to say, hey, what so-and-so said, that's what I would like to explore more. Or what so-and-so said, that's what I would like to, or maybe these 2 things or 3 things go together. So why don't we, so this is where we say, hey, you know, I would like to pursue a conversation about that or that. Now that you know what's on the table, David, what's on the table that grabs your attention?
COVID. I think what Matthias is talking about, that's I didn't mention it, but my son has COVID right now, so we're in quarantine, and it's very interesting to interact with people and have conversations in this kind of space right now. So yeah, I'm especially schools and regulations and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, that's personal level. Yeah, definitely.
Okay, thank you, Dave. Nate, what's on the table that grabs your attention?
Like I mentioned, I was thinking about power a lot. So I was noticing the power dynamics and the different things you were talking about. Quentin, your question about psychology versus church biblical counseling. I've been reading a number of books by Chuck DeGroat because he sort of talks about this heart stuff that I'm trying to tackle. And I've been wrestling a lot with his use of language. He'll use phrases like the God that is in you, or like your inner light, or talk about sin in ways that are less like a rebellion against the holy God and more like a departure from your inherent wholeness or goodness. And I don't know how much of that is in psychology as a whole, but I've just been trying to pin down, like, what is he doing with language here? And in terms of power dynamics there, it's like whoever gets to define what something means sort of gets to determine the trajectory of the rest of the story and where the outcomes are, and in the end what's good or bad. And even when it comes to this marriage equality video, which I also watched, that's what struck me, is it's coming down in a lot of ways. It feels like trying to pin down like what is good and bad in this situation. And if people have competing stories, then it sort of just becomes a power play with different methods of employing that power, whether, like Paul, you were talking about people playing the long game and trying to just exhaust the institutional church, or whether to like give way to a different definition a little bit out of compassion, or just to buckle down, or to try to take over the political process to ram a different definition through. Like there's all different ways of trying to solve the problem, so to speak, but a lot of them have to do with like trying to enforce something on somebody else. And it's hard to see a way out of that. I'm pretty perplexed. So I'd be interested in talking about any of those things more, but especially in relation to how power intersects with them.
Excellent. Thank you, Nate. Quentin?
Yeah, I think I was going on the same path as you, Nate. I was listening to, like, Dave mention, like, where does the ideal go? So I'm thinking, power, authority. And then also with the psychology question, even what you said, Tanya, that, yeah, that where does the self fit in to all this discussion? And then how much of it's like there's like the tension between finding the, like, you hear like people talk about your authentic self and being authentic, and then you hear that word authentic, and every time I hear it, I think of the word authority now, and I go, okay, how do you relate to authority? That's like the next question, and what you're looking at when you're talking about what the authentic self is. And then, biblical counseling, psychology, like how does the Bible, how does what we experience out in the world and all of the other resources that are out there come together to find that authority and that power? I mean, and it even relates to the COVID topic. I mean, we see a lot of power getting exercised right now in lots of different ways, and a lot of power being abdicated too. So yeah, power dynamics, that'd be fun to talk about.
Cool. Very nice. Matthias?
Yeah, John, I think I would be interested in what you told us, what's happening at your local place. I mean, the estuary and the institution, I think, is an interesting topic. So how much institutionalization is healthy for the estuary, and how much openness do you need?
Yeah. Okay. Well, Tanya, what are you thinking?
Well, I have two topics that are definitely of interest to me. Your topic, John, about estuary in the church, but also how much diversity is within the church, but still having boundaries. So if we think about, I don't know, the church is kind of a playground. If you're not into slides, you can go on the swings, and that's all right, or everyone has to line up and do one thing, you know, if there's a bit of diversity, but still there are some rules in the playground about what's appropriate and what's not. So that's interesting about that whole diversity of community in the church. I'm also interested in the psychology, spiritual. I'm actually just about to finish a graduate diploma in psychology, but I'm just at the moment taking a spiritual narrative therapy for spiritual practice as part of a theology degree. So yeah, so I'm also interested in the telos, the goodness of God working through in someone's life and respecting their agency, and not using power to force someone to move in a different direction, but being gentle and trusting the Spirit and that approach.
Thank you. Thank you. So I feel really old right now because when I was in seminary, I ended up writing a paper on the difference between J. Adams' directive counseling and that's how old I am. I'm blanking on his name. Non-directive, La Jolla, California. Help me out, people. Carl Rogers. Carl Rogers, non-directive, active listening kind of therapy. And so the one clearly being, you know, we know what the Word of God says. We know how you deviate from it. So if you correct that, then your life will be in line with what God wants of you and you'll be healthy. Kind of, there's a good deal of church authority behind that. There is a particular interpretation of the scriptures that is behind that. And then on the other hand is Carl Rogers saying, this is a little bit of a caricature, but what he's really doing, he's saying, there is a certain kind of truth inside of you that has been suppressed long enough. So I want to create a safe space for you to get that out and access that for yourself and what lies in the deeper recesses of your selfhood. And so it was known as non-directive counseling. And it's old. And a lot of what we hear today are just variations of those two things. Either you're going to do it according to a standard, or the standard is within you somehow, and all we need to do is make room for that to emerge to the surface. At this very moment, I do not want to express any preference for one or the other, but it seems like it might be an interesting foil for us to structure our conversation around. And Paul, do you have a preference between all the stuff that's on the table? I want to talk about Paul myself. That's surely going to get me kicked out of this.
All right. My preference is that we not talk about Paul.
All right. Well, I think that some direction has emerged, and I think that speaking as one of a group of people that have a little bit of experience with this thing. I mean, you've all been part of this thing, so I have been known at this stage of the game to just say, let's go. So I'm going to say that, let's go. You guys know what to do next.
Well, I would love to just explain a tiny bit about narrative therapy. It does have a little bit of direction in your job of the person listening. You listen for stories of hope. So someone may share a problem, but sometimes within that there may be either a way they've dealt with that problem previously, that they've managed it, that they've forgotten, they haven't succeeded all the time, but you can examine the times they've tackled it in a way that's been helpful. Or, you know, as we filter information from what we have happen in our lives, sometimes one story kind of dominates, but there's another story of hope that can be strengthened. So it's not that it's whatever, it's like you're looking for what's good, what's hopeful, strengthening that in the person's life. But it's what's in their life already. And the person has agency. So you ask them, oh, I'm curious about this thing you mentioned here, that's, you know, that's, tell me more about that. So it's not completely whatever. It is aimed towards something good and purposeful, but it's giving the person agency to journey with them.
So it's kind of like a directive, non-directive therapy.
Exactly.
Thank you for clarifying that.
In our men's group, I've let in a few people from the internet world, and one of those people is Warren Mills, who's the guy who brought me to Australia. And Warren grew up dispensational, so he loves to attack me on Calvinism and things like this. And this whole topic of agency is so incredibly layered in, you know, part of what, you know, Brett Sockel came in talking about. You'll hear Roman Catholics talk about first and second level or degree agency. And, you know, there's part of what even the silence of Carl Rogers saying, and having people pull things out of themselves. You have still, as Nate noted, you have still created the space. I mean, there's just even what seems like a posture of repose is actually expressing agency. Even relinquishment or surrender is expressing agency. So this is very, very subtle things.
It occurred to me, I don't know if this is a helpful way of framing it, but sometimes when Jordan Peterson talks about the archetypes of masculine and feminine, he talks about the masculine archetype being more of like a aggressive, dominating, forceful kind of power, and the feminine is more like a receiving, nurturing, shaping. So maybe that's also a dynamic that's at play. And does that map onto these two different types of therapy, the directive, non-directive?
I don't think so. I do think that a person has to want to change, and they have to choose the thing. In therapy, you want to choose the thing that the person wants to change. Otherwise, you know, you can't be motivated by someone forcing you to change in an area. But maybe even with the directive counseling, a good counselor would be sensitive to, you know, often these frameworks, a very good counselor will work with a framework but still get the same result. I do think a person has to own that wanting to change, and so it has to come from them, but you can strengthen that motivation. I don't know if it's a masculine feminine thing. I mean, the founders of narrative therapy are both male. I know there's the characterization that often counts as a female, but yeah.
And founding is a very masculine thing to do, even if it's a feminine thing they found.
Yeah, I was Tanya, you saying people have to want to change. I overheard a conversation on the street last weekend. someone was saying that they were describing something that happened in the news, and then they said, these are the facts of what happened, and then they were talking about the feelings that came from it, or the feelings that, you know, generated all the responses that the story is writing about. And then they were feeling all these very, I don't know, it wasn't joy, it wasn't peace, it wasn't patience. It was kind of an impatient, anxiety, anxious, worrisome kind of thing, right? And I think that's what the facts of the story were. But it just, you could hear like the hopelessness in their reaction to that news. And yeah, it's so important to monitor your stories and monitor the stories you're telling yourself and the stories you're living out. And that's been really sitting with me, because it changes the emotions that come, right? The structure of the story. So your narrative therapy stuff, whenever you talk about it, it's very intriguing. I like it.
Just wanted to add one more thing. Sometimes we have parts of ourselves we don't feel are going to change the side of, you know, we want to maybe work with the things that the spirit is working with, and some things we just have to say, okay, I'm just going to keep struggling with that one. It's in terms of how much can we change about ourselves until our brokenness, until like the resurrection, where God kind of re-puts us together. Yeah.
I guess I got a question to prompt the group then. Earlier, Nate, when you were talking about power, you said you were wondering about where does power come from? So I guess my question now is, that desire to change, where does that come from in a person? Because I've looked back on my life and I can see when I've been telling myself the wrong story, right? And I can never pin down exactly where that change occurred, you know, where the power came from to see a story differently. It just seems like happenstance, you know, and just people that come into your life and things that happen to you. And it's like a perceptiveness and awareness of, I don't know, I was like looking for it, and hope. You started off with hope too. It's like hope has to be there first. So yeah, any thoughts on that?
Well, the Calvinist and Arminian debate is a little bit like, is God, if you think of the spirit working in your life, is it the spirit works and you respond, or you're seeking and then I don't think it matters, but yeah, which way you kind of see it. Sometimes the problem has to be a big enough problem that we want to make a change, right? And then the problem story, we think, oh, just sick of this, something's got to change. And other times we just like, I'm just going to ignore that problem. Let's go and watch some more YouTube. Yeah.
And sometimes change is simply a change in perspective. Because I went through life for 57 years thinking that I grew up fatherless and was angry and bitter about that. Went to a Richard Rohr seminar that focused primarily on helping boys become men. And it was kind of an initiation ritual. And as he sent us out into the wilderness to do some heavy duty reflecting, he said to me, to my face, you will experience the change that changes everything. And my gut reaction was, yeah, right. But I nevertheless walked into the woods, and I'll give you the short version. At some point, sitting there for a number of hours, got quite irritated at the futility of it all. And my irritation made me kind of irritatingly ask the question, why couldn't so-and-so have been my father? Or for that matter, why couldn't so-and-so have been my father? And maybe why couldn't so-and-so have been my father? And I got to 4 or 5 down the list, and all of a sudden the light went on and I said, whoa, there are a lot of people in my life who have had some fatherly influence on me. And maybe when everything is said and done, I got better fathering in my life than I ever realized. And that eye-opening experience made me look at all those men in a totally different light. They now were instruments of God to help me grow up. And even my own father, who abandoned me many years prior, was redeemed in the process, because with my new insight, I was able to even see some redeeming factors in his relationship with me, things that I learned from him that I would have never admitted before I had the change of perspective. So sometimes change does not constitute even a change in behavior or a change in circumstances, but sometimes it just involves a change in perspective and insight. I don't know if that's helpful.
It is helpful. It's like you told yourself a new story instead of keep telling yourself, I didn't have a father, I've missed out, this was bad. You began to see the threads of people that were father-like figures providing those things that you needed. And then that probably, there was kind of a rewriting of your own history as you thought through, oh yeah, God, or that person came into my life and they did X, Y, Z. And so that can have a ripple-on effect.
And I never again, after that moment, whined and complained that I grew up without a father. That has never again happened since then. So it's been a nice little run here for now, for a few years.
This is making me think of in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus sort of inverts the power pyramid, and he's saying things like, blessed are the poor of spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And it seems like that's just essentially a change of perspective more than it is a change of behavior. He does have behaviors that he addresses in the second half, but it seems like those all flow out of the change of perspective. People who are poor in spirit and all of the other negative things in the world's eyes, mourning and being gentle and hungering and thirsting. Like if we think we're essentially powerless, then, and that's our perspective on ourselves, then either we don't have hope, or we try to use what little power we have to get what we need from other people. It's so, yeah, that change in perspective, that's really interesting.
Yeah, there's like a, that the poor in spirit, the mourning, the meek, hungry and thirsting. It's there's like a desirous aspect there, right? And it's that's almost like, like I give that story where the facts came before the emotions. Well, this is like one of the emotions come before the facts change, right? You got to get to that, when you're at that point of lacking all understanding, right? Needing some understanding, something beneath you to hold you up. That's when like perspectives can change, right? I've been thinking about that a lot. Like I think it's what we do in Estuary, right? I mean, I think when we talk, we're trying to understand each other instead of looking to just be understood. And that's a big difference. I've been watching myself when I talk right now. Am I doing it to understand or be understood? And yeah, I'll leave that there.
I'm curious, John, if that story affected how you related maybe to other young men in your life who didn't have fathers, or whether that flowed on from.
Well,
Yeah.
well, there are elements of that story which you can find on Paul's channel, so we'll just leave it at that.
Okay.
But I would like to at least draw out the fact that I have quite an interest in estuary and in estuary gatherings and in estuary on the ground. And so, as I sometimes do in our conversation here, you know, we can somehow shift towards very religious language, in which there's a lot of insider language and a lot of spiritual language and a lot of Bible talk and all of that. But now, if there were 2 or 3 atheists in our midst right now, how would we have to change our language or our tone or our the way we approach the topics that are under consideration, such as marriage equality or power? I mean, how you talk about that in a more generic language rather than using the highly specialized Christianese? Because if all goes well, you will face that situation when you have your estuary on the ground and Joe Schmo from down the road walks in and says, "What are you guys doing here? And why are you having this conversation that I don't understand?"
And even before that, you have to think about where to at what place would you organize your estuary, right? I mean, in the institution or at a restaurant. I mean, that's to begin with, that could be a barrier before you even talk to people.
He says to the guy who just started an estuary in his church.
Moved it to his church.
Moved it to his church. Yeah. Yeah, that's true. And he can keep a straight face under it all too, yeah.
But you know, John and I have talked about these questions a lot, and these are very much the kinds of questions I get from churches that are thinking about groups like these, because churches understandably have an agenda that involves their own propagation. And I am a minister in a Protestant denomination, and yet one of the things that I've thought a lot about and continue to think about is, you know, lately I touched on it a little bit in the 3-hour video about marriage equality, but the way in which after the Protestant Reformation, even the state becomes sort of the second speed of Protestantism. Charles Taylor, in comparing Roman Catholicism to Protestantism, said, well, Roman Catholicism is 2 speed and Protestantism is 1 speed. And I used to talk about that, and I'd get some Roman Catholics would get a little upset with me. Mary would really push back on that. And the more I think about it, it almost seems that the space outside of the church, the secular space downstream from the Protestant Reformation, has sort of become the second speed. So the church is supposed to be the sort of like the monastery to the community in the medieval Catholic community within Christendom. And so all of these issues are, is there a Christian analogy, or is there a secular analogy to what Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount? Because I find in secular spaces, people in sort of a poetic manner will look at the Sermon on the Mount and say, oh, isn't that lovely? And in other words, some of the vision has so saturated into the public imagination that we have this, we embrace, whether we identify as Christian or not, we embrace this ideal of care for the weak and concern and making space for the lowest and the least of these. We don't no longer associate that with Christianity, partly because of the dynamics of church and state, because, you know, people don't bang on the doors of the monastery and say, you bigots, you don't let in married people. Well, there are some, you know, married orders too in Roman Catholicism, but everybody sort of understands that. Well, if you go to the monastery, the shtick is, well, there's lots of prayer and maybe some chanting and solitude and working, and
married to
like,
Jesus.
yeah, you're married to Jesus. You wear the clothing. So there's lots going on here. You know, I loved how Nate sort of set it up in terms of, well, it's so funny because we're so quick to sort of say power is a dirty word and agency is the good word, but it's like, isn't power and agency, they're pretty deeply tied.
I'm pretty sure we have more stuff on the table than your silence would indicate. So
this could be part of the reason why I have, up until this point, always said we don't record and publish estuary meetings. There's an inhibition to the knowledge of being viewed.
I've been thinking about your challenge, John, if there were 3 atheists, and then thinking about what Quentin said about listening. And so, I mean, I would want to be listening to those people and sharing their thoughts, listening to them and then interacting with their thoughts. And that would naturally change the kind of language I would be using, because there's no point using language that they don't understand. I want to interact. I mean, I may bring in an idea that's a different discourse and explain it, but I'll be wanting to interact with them using the framework that they're
on their terms. Yeah.
On their terms. Yeah. Yeah.
That's a good insight, because of course we are to some significant degree all on the same page here, and that's why Paul occasionally says that, you know, his conversations are greatly improved if a few atheists show up in the estuary or in the meetup. So that, I mean, he's on record as having said that. So
yeah,
yeah,
because it challenges our assumptions to think, now, why do I automatically think from that perspective? And so then I can examine it, and yeah.
Very true. And actually, in the previous group that met in the period prior to this, there were 3 new people, and all 3 of them were quite eloquent in describing the depth and extent of their deconstruction. So that was very much related to the use of language. And one of the guys did say that once, upon Jordan Peterson's prompting, he decided to go back to church. He was initially offended by and downright resisted the pervasiveness of Christian language. It is a certain language that tends to serve as a mechanism to protect the insiders from the outsiders and the outsiders from the insiders. There is a borderline there. That's why Tanya Luhrmann has this book out, you know, when God Talks Back, which is all about the way we learn our Christian language in community. And that's where it has a function, and it even has a role in shaping our world and life experience and our spiritual experience within the church community. But it also serves as a mechanism to separate the men from the boys, and in that if you can't or won't learn or speak the language or use the language, then you can't be part of the thing. So there's a distinct danger that even estuary can become a very secluded space in a way. Speak to that.
Yeah, I guess I'll throw something out there. It's funny how, you know, we say often, because in our group, I think we're all Christians here, we always say we tend to get off in Christianese, and then we say, what if an atheist, you know, came in here, how would that change the dynamic? And we're always checking ourselves for that. But you could equally have like an atheist group and then a Christian walks in, and then the dynamic changes, right? And I guess something that's helped me figure out how to navigate estuarial conversations. And Pajot just did a video with this, with the Ancient Faith podcast guy, who's talking about like the universal history. And that has helped me a lot, because I've, some days I wonder if, you know, I'm in this non-denominational Bible church, and I'm always just having conversations with friends. I wonder if there's someday gonna find out that I'm getting these ideas from you know, Pajot and Orthodox thought, and I'm bringing them in and having conversations with people. I wonder if they're ever gonna be like, you know, if it's ever gonna come to the surface. But the universal history has been very, what's the right word, freeing for me, because I'm realizing that the common language can be, like in the podcast that Pajot just did a couple days ago, you know, the guy he's speaking to says, you know, Christ came and announced victory over death to all, like, you know, to all. Like, it's like it's not like something, a choice that we make. It's something that he came and announced, and then the people he tells it to come say, okay, how do I respond to that and come into conformity with this proclamation, right? I hope I'm not losing anybody here, but I'm just realizing that the Christian language can be, I don't know, like translated out of the Christianese that we tend to reduce ourselves to in a church community. And like, I guess it has to be done carefully, but you can play it out in other languages so that a common language can be found to then talk about a universal truth. So I hope I didn't muddle all of that, but.
Can I ask a question of Paul here? So Paul, you've done this in a lot of different contexts, but particularly when you have been talking with John Vervaeke on your channel. I mean, he obviously has some Christian background, so he knows how to speak that language, but most of your conversation is not in explicit Christianese terms. So in your experience, how do you connect?
I think experience has a lot to do with it. I think a self-consciousness about the Christianese. I've worked for a long time. A lot of, even before I started my YouTube channel, a lot of what I thought about was trying to find different language, trying to express things that I knew in different ways. And then, I mean, Nate, when you talked about Chuck DeGroat, so I've got a little bit of a history with Chuck DeGroat, and I might talk about this on an upcoming video where I talk about I might do a commentary on a video from Sean McDowell, because the language that Chuck is using is now sort of the default language of the therapeutic community, and that language has been intentionally developed to avoid Christian content. And I think I've got a fair amount to say about it that goes beyond what I can say right now. If you look, I had an experience once where I was at a birthday party of a good friend, and he grew up Roman Catholic, Puerto Rican. He's no longer a Christian. His ex-wife had this birthday party, and she had a musician there. And this musician was playing songs from Buddhist songs and Hindu songs and American protest songs. And this musician was about to play a song that had some Christian reference to it. And that musician must have given 5 minutes of disclaimer before playing that song. And they felt absolutely no embarrassment about playing songs from the other traditions. And so this again speaks to the power of context. And And so part of what I do with someone like John Vervaeke is I try to listen carefully to his language. And so then when I talk to him, use his language when I'm speaking with him. And that takes some doing, but it's key. And, you know, part of what when I first started my channel, most of the negative commentary I would get from people were from Christians that were pretty monolingual in terms of, why aren't you talking about Jesus more? Why aren't you quoting from the Bible? Why aren't you using these theological terms? It's not that I can't use those terms. I have just found, even in church work, that if you stick to too narrow a vocabulary, nobody learns anything. And people enjoy it because, especially if they're feeling this, a place like California, if they feel sort of always surrounded by people who are antithetical to that language, it sort of becomes code talk to reinforce the group and to reduce their anxiety. And there's good function to that. But you're probably not going to help those people actually be less bunker oriented and more engaging, and perhaps have better relationships with their neighbors. So that's part of the reason that I've developed the skills that I have with respect to language and talking to people, and why I do what I do.
I have lots of thoughts now, but one of the things that prompted my whole walk and what I was trying to process was a conversation I had, I think I mentioned earlier, with this group that I'm helping to organize, and we're going to do a project for our denomination here, for our church. And we had it's kind of one of those things where when you go public, okay, you start public in the sense we start relating to the broader church community that we serve. Well, what kind of pushback, what kind of critique might come? We had those kind of discussions. And so I don't know if anybody can relate to this, but I think I would say Matthias and I, we live in a world where hardly anybody talks Christianese ever. You just aren't going to meet that unless you are in a very specific location where, you know, it's maybe a Christian gathering or a church service or so. I mean, you just don't ever encounter that. And so I feel like that's my everyday life, right? Like is trying to understand the world around me and learn to navigate that, listening carefully to the language, you know, meeting people where they're at. In fact, I want to be conversant in that, because that's my world, it's my life. And so then in a meeting like this, I find myself getting frustrated, because then we're sitting here talking about the whole impulse is our church is in a crisis. We're dying, you know, there's old people. What's the future? You know, we should pray. You know, that's important to us. That's something that has a lot of meaning for us in the in-group, right? Let's organize a different approach with that, but we're going to try to do something, just kind of a initiative, a month of prayer. We're going to have some inputs, you know, and hopefully even bring in some of these things that we talk about in Estuary. But we're going to be partnering with different people and everything. And then the first comment is, well, should we talk about prayer too much? Should we use that word? I'm like, whoa. And so this is me. Most of my life is connecting to the world around me, and then the particularity of a Christian practice, right? Which is the whole point of what we're trying to do. And I just remember I was getting kind of mad, because it's like, well, what do you mean? Like, what's the point then? If we're going to be if we're not clear, then we're not clear, right? And the discussion went a little further, like, oh, it was all the discussion about what language should we use in as we relate to the broader church. Should we talk about should we say Lord? Should we say King? Should we, and all the critique that we knew that was going to be coming, right? And so I just remember, like, that was a frustrating thing for me, because on the one hand, I feel like my whole life is trying to figure out to be conservative to the conversational to the broader culture. And then when you try to do something where we're trying to maybe do a renewal a little bit within the church, then that conversation, anyway, it frustrated me. So I don't know if anybody relates to that. But I often find myself at that intersection.
John, can I put the ball back in your court?
Sure.
So your estuary is meeting in a church building. Would you find it appropriate to use all of this for any of this Christianese with the atheists in your group, given the context of being in a church building?
Well, we picked the music room, which is not the sanctuary. I have this interesting spatial thing going. Once upon a time, we conceived of estuary as the outer court of the temple. And the language is a little different. They speak Greek and Aramaic over there, and they don't speak the sacred language of the Holy of Holies and the inner court. So yeah, it's a little bit more of a rough and tumble world. So I think that I'm kind of on the same path that Paul describes, is learning the language of the world around the church and find the places where what describes itself as a secular space nevertheless has embodied or is embodying a lot of religious concepts and themes. And so I would prefer to talk about it in the non-Christianese version, even when I'm surrounded by Christians. You find the lowest common denominator. If the Christians happen to know certain things by a different name, then good for them, and they can talk about that during the worship service on Sunday. And the rest of the time, maybe it would be better if they learn the language of their neighbors and learn to talk about redemption in a different language, and learn to talk about community in a different language, and learn to talk about forgiveness in a different language, and learn to talk about the kinds of things that matter to Jesus, when he himself actually didn't use the language of the Pharisees. He used the language of everyday life and food and farming and the language of the people around him. He knew how to get down to brass tacks and talk about those damn tax collectors that charge too much money. How about you give some of that back, dude? And so that would be a model that I think is more. As soon as you say more effective, the next question is effective onto what? So that is another part of the equation. I mean, what are we trying to do here? What are we trying to change the world? Are we trying to save the world? Are we trying to save the world from itself? Are we trying in the end to get everybody on our side? Or what's really going on here? And so I have lower goals, and I'm perfectly happy creating a community where people can talk to each other in the language that they all understand. So let's just start with that. So yeah, ball back to you.
John, you sorry, go ahead, Nate. Okay. You tipped something off for me, John. When you said Jesus was using the language of, not the scribes and the Pharisees and all that, I realized Jesus did quote scripture though, and he was going back, and
he was wrong when he did that.
Well, what I'm driving at here is that's funny. I lost my thought. Oh, I got it. Yeah. I feel what was he going back and revisiting, almost like replumbing it, like to see it new? Like you talked about a perspective shift earlier. I mean, is that maybe that's what we're trying to do in Estuaries, like I don't know if replumbing is the right word, but like a reassessment of our language and just going back to change go back to plumb the depths again to find something brilliant that sparkles and works, and that's applicable now because it's there in the story. It's just that as the stories are told after 50, 60, a couple generations, they start to fade and they need to be returned to. I mean, I found that I found that to be something I gleaned from all of these conversations, just new ways of thinking about old topics.
Well,
You've heard it said, but I say.
Yeah, right there, coming up in the Sermon on the Mount, right after the Beatitudes.
You've heard it said, but I say.
This stuff gets into, something that continues to really keep my attention. That I released 2 videos today. A first one, which is about 45 minutes more on same-sex marriage. And then the second one, a conversation I had yesterday from a guy in LA, which I thought was just a terrific conversation because he so exemplified this place that I've heard so many people. So they found Jordan Peterson, and I mean, he had kind of been wandering in the wilderness of church, and he's looking for the Jordan Peterson church, or at least the church that speaks Jordan Peterson. And now this is where a whole bunch of things get triggered, because of course the Roman Catholic Church is, we are the true church. I mean, the Roman Catholics will say that without much,
Blushing.
without much blushing. They just, a lot of Protestants, Roman Catholics, and of course the Orthodox are like, y'all changed it. It was right in the first place. And if you can just get back to before y'all messed it up, here we have it. And, basically in the conversation, I said, I'm just going to expose my Protestant nature and say, I think and I think Estuary is a part of this. I don't see Estuary as a church, which is why I called it an estuary. If I was going to call it a church, I would have called it something else. I have the language to do that. But I think what we need is a process and a journey that will be in anticipation of church renewal to be able to address so much of what we have in the culture. And so I look at the Roman Catholics and the Orthodox and say, I think you're doing that too. I'm not going to put you in a corner and make you swear that Jonathan Peugeot using the internet and doing movie reviews is somehow violating orthodoxy. I'm not going to press that point, because I don't think I should. And I don't know that he is, but there's the Orthodox Church in America in 2021 is going to be different than the Orthodox Church in Tbilisi, Georgia in the 10th century. And we were all working those things out. And so I think there's as a Protestant, it's a little easier to say, we're still on a journey with our Lord, and he is still perfecting his bridegroom and getting her ready for that day. And you
have a little gender change going on here.
Which we're always the feminine. He's the masculine. We are. I know,
but you said the bridegroom.
Oh, I'm sorry, the bride. Yeah, sorry about that. Oh, gosh. So anyway, I think this is a deeply important conversation, because it's in the conflicts and all of this stuff that we're doing. I think we are, to use this, use this phrase that we love so much now, we're doing the work.
When you were saying that, Paul, I was thinking about in the past century or so, there's been different revival preachers who are able to go and bring lots of people to Christianity. But it seems like, without taking anything away from the Holy Spirit, at least part of what made that possible is sort of like the latent Christian assumptions in a lot of the American population. And it sounds like you're saying Estuary would be sort of a way of, without saying that this is what everyone would be coming to Estuary for, it'd be a way of rebuilding the language bridge so that if there was going to be a revival or renewal from the Christian perspective, like it could actually happen. We could actually speak the same language.
I think, if you look at, what you described is certainly true of the American situation, but if you look at something like the Korean revival at the beginning of the 20th century, that blazed through a country that Christianity in Asia, that's a very interesting history. But anyway, so yeah, I don't know that I was thinking in those terms. I think when I think about Estuary, I think much more relationally and less, because I think the language follows relationships. If, when Van Donk wound up following cows to America, his English improved. So, his love of cows gave him the beautiful articulations we enjoy today. So.
Oh, you're just sucking them back into your videos. That's what you're doing.
That's right. It's all about the clicks.
Clickbait.
If anybody, if you guys haven't watched my first conversation with John Van Donk, that is a special conversation on my channel. It really is. Richard Rohr and cows.
I find this whole conversation fascinating, that we're talking about language and because that has so much to do with what happens in Estuary, and that's my personal draw to it, is that recognizing that on a personal level, in interpersonal relationships, on a daily basis, I have these types of conversations often with people, but there really isn't a place where I can invite people to conversation, right? And that's my draw to Estuary. I it's so valuable, and that's just, there's something sacred about having space and time and that openness to develop relationships and talk about things that I would say, broadly speaking, we don't know how to talk about religion very well right now. You go to other parts of the world, that's not the issue, but in the West, we're going through deep transition in this area, and we're not have a lot of places to talk. We have conversations within the church, and again, I was frustrated with certain aspects of that because my experience says we do speak a particular language, right? And so then you can see how that is encountering the culture around it, and that culture's way of talking is coming into the church, and how do we interact with that? But that particularity, the particularity of the way we understand our own language is something that, I'm in that category too, of many Christians are still learning that that's a particular thing. And we're not always used to that when we have talked more broadly about religion. And so in our own context. And so this is where I find Estuary so valuable, because I learn more about that particularness because I get to have conversations with atheists, for example. And that opens up all kinds of both ways, I think, understanding of oneself. And so that's what I'm drawn to, is being part of that and helping to host those kinds of conversations, because I see exactly that is something that doesn't exist very much. I think it happens on the internet more and more, maybe.
Yep.
But to actually do that live, wow.
Yeah. And that's why I think churches need estuaries. That's why I named the concept the way I did. The imaginative framing of it is the way it is, because churches need this. And as a pastor, I've been deeply frustrated that there just simply wasn't space in the church to do it, and the people of the church were not equipped to do it well. And so, and I stumbled into this because I started making Jordan Peterson videos, people wanted to talk to me, and I had to talk back, and I had to learn their language. And, you know, so here we are.
I think another thing that's kind of pertinent in this conversation is that, you know, if we're going to, you know, if this is a demo of Estuary protocol or Estuary, the Estuary experience, the Estuary protocol also includes the democratic selection of topics. So it is not just the language we use, it is also the topics we address, because if you do start your meetings on the ground in a circle, in the way we started our meeting today, hi, who are you? What have you been thinking about? You open it up to having the resident atheist or two say, well, I'll tell you what I've been thinking about. And that could be something totally outside of your particular church experience, because they may be complaining about the price of beer, or the fact that the subway system isn't running on time, or, you know, any number of, you know, why can I not find a quality wife or husband? Those are topics that, you know, we don't naturally gravitate towards those topics, because in our religious sphere, we kind of have all these things figured out. And so we talk about kind of esoteric things that are a little bit further removed from reality, except that they're not. And I would be the first to admit that, but it is done in a frame that is 2 steps removed from, you see those tattoos on that checker girl in the grocery store? I mean, that is just crazy. That's what I mean. What do those tattoos represent? You know? So this is my way of trying to be relevant here to the world, trying to represent atheism to the best of my ability. I'm sorry.
I have a question for all of you. Do you think, I mean, this question of language is I think is really central. And do you think, as an Estuary host, you should intervene if people use too much in-group language, and how can you do that?
Joey
Because
does it all
I
the
mean,
time.
but sorry, yeah, Paul.
Joey does it all the time on the Discord, and you know, if we have I haven't hosted a local meeting here for a while, but if I host a local meeting and we start talking about stuff on the Discord, Joey always say, no Discord talk in the room here. Do the Discord talk on the Discord. So yeah, a leader does have to do some enforcement usually.
Yeah, a leader has
Yeah,
to
I mean,
exercise a
because
little bit
in
of
the
power.
Discord environment, I mean, okay, you talked about the Christianese, but in the Discord environment, there's a new in-group language developing, right? I mean, the Verveki terms and stuff like that. If you even start to use those terms, a lot of people won't even know what you're talking about. So, I mean,
once you have a group, you will develop a language. It always happens. Friends do it, husbands and wives do it, families do it. It's a functional language.
So in the Estuary, are we trying to enter the other person's group? Are we trying to get them to enter our group? Or are we trying to make a totally new group?
I think it's a fresh space, because like the imagery of the estuary, it's the salt water and the fresh water. And I appreciate being a safe place to explore maybe how my previous Christian narrative doesn't fit anymore. You know what I mean? So maybe there's other people who've been part of church previously and it hasn't fitted for a while, but there's something precious that they had previously that they don't want to lose. And so Estuary is a great place maybe to explore those things that no one's going to call you a heretic because I don't know, you're interested in John Vervaeke, or, you know, you're interested in exploring a whole lot of ideas which is outside the Christian space, but still see that as part of your spirituality, that God is at work in all kinds of places, including the church, right?
What was John's like, enable screen sharing, and it's like, I can't trust Van Donk to do anything. I trust that Van Donk will do something. What did you do, Van Donk? I don't know.
Well, somebody made that picture. I don't know. Somebody decided that when on the Discord server, you may not talk about the Discord. And in the estuary, you may not talk about estuary. That's the first rule of estuary.
Yeah.
And you never record estuary meetups.
That's right.
And you know, right? I know. I said that. Yeah, I don't know where this is going to go. Maybe we should just downvote this whole publishing thing. Posting it.
No way. No way. It's too good not to share.
Okay. Well, we are running towards the end of our time together, and are there any kinds of closing remarks that anyone wants to, you know, some last licks in, or some words of encouragement or edification, or there's a Christian word for you, edification. So, but any closing remarks before we stop the recording?
I just wanted to thank you, Paul, for, like, it's really exciting to hear, like, as a person in high in openness, I really appreciated your YouTube channel and what you're doing, and that openness to ask questions and explore stuff. That's been of help to me.
Thank you. Thank you. That's
Yeah,
when
Tom,
people send me notes and stuff and say that, it's really helpful, because there are many days when I put stuff on my channel and I think, why am I doing this? This is insane. This isn't smart. I go to bed at night thinking, what did I say? I'm sure. And then other people are hurt by what I say. And a lot of people are annoyed by what I do, especially I think in the Christian Reformed Church. But I don't know.
I had one final lick, John. It just can't. Tanya, you said the word there, and sometimes in Estuary we get like these pithy mottos or slogans, and this one just popped in the head. It was in Estuary, we're exploring language instead of exploiting it. I feel like that. And then but then you could say, you know, once we explore it and we figure out something, then we all go and we exploit it elsewhere. And then we come back and talk about how it worked.
Well, there's something a little bit different about the Estuary Leadership Support Network, because in a way we do a little bit of reflection on what happens in the estuary and why we do what we do. I think that your average estuary group may focus less attention on the estuary process. You kind of, you know, adopt it and run with it. But for us here, it's kind of helpful to be somewhat cognizant of what are we doing and why are we doing what we are doing, and to what end, and what are the obstacles, and what can we do to improve the process. So that's kind of what this conversation is about. And I think we did it very well. So yeah, thank you, Paul. And thank you all for your willingness to be recorded and have this posted. Although I think that
Nate wants to say something.
I'm sorry.
Oh, I just wanted to ask Dave and Matthias if anything that we were talking about was connecting with your questions about COVID. Maybe that's a whole nother can of worms, but just wanted to close the loop on that if possible.
Yeah.
Not directly. I don't know. Dave?
No, I mean, COVID's a whole nother bag of worms, or can of worms, not a bag of worms, maybe a bag of worms.
But it's also an illustration and an affirmation, I think, of what part of what Estuary can be is not just an exchange of ideas and a conversation about concepts, but it is also the building of relationships and caring for one another, and it becomes an expression of love for one another. And if those are not secular terms, then so be it. I think that almost anybody in the world looks for a place to belong and connect and feel wanted. So
Good. Shall I stop the recording?
what do you want, more compliments or what?
Horrible man, that Van Donk.